Are you trying to get into DSLR or mirrorless photography? Are the terms like ISO, Aperture, Shutter Speed scaring you? Or you just bought a camera and your photos look like this or this? Don't worry, in the next 5 minutes you can quickly get started into DSLR and mirrorless photography, and you will easily understand the concepts of ISO, Aperture and Shutter Speed. So let's get started. So easy to take a photo on a smartphone. Just point and click and your phone handles everything for you. Why is it so difficult to take a good picture on a mirrorless camera? That's because you will have to set all those settings by yourself. Though it requires a lot of understanding of how these work, the advantage is you get the complete control of how your photo should look instead of your camera deciding it. Don't worry. Taking a good photo is very simple. You just need to get two things right: the exposure and focus. For a moment, assume your camera can autofocus, and let's talk about exposure first. Exposure is nothing but how bright or dark your photo needs to be. So you just have to tell your camera what the exposure of the photo needs to be. Okay, isn't just one setting enough to tell the camera how much exposure is needed? Well, due to different components of the camera like sensors, lens, shutter, etc., instead of one, they have given you 3 settings to adjust the exposure, and they are obviously the ISO, Aperture and Shutter Speed. You increase any of these 3 settings and your photo will get brighter, and when you decrease any of these 3 settings, your photo will get darker. They are nothing more than 3 knobs to increase or decrease your exposure. It would have been nice if there was a simple scale of 1 to 10 for each setting. Instead, they are numbered differently due to physics behind them. Let's look at each of them separately. First, the ISO. ISO is nothing but how sensitive your camera is to light, meaning if the camera is highly sensitive, like when the ISO is high, your image will be brighter. And if it's less sensitive to light, like when the ISO is low, your photo will be darker. Simple, right? Instead of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, ISO values are measured in steps like ISO 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, etc. When film rolls were used, this is how they measured the sensitivity of light of the film, and that convention has stuck. There is an important side effect of changing the ISO of the sensor, and that is noise. You see, when the sensor is highly sensitive to light, the image will have some grains or light noise which may look unpleasant. So as a general rule, it is best to capture a photo at the least ISO possible. Next, the aperture. You might know that there is a lens in front of the camera which lets light in to be captured by the sensor. The lens has an opening like a door which will let the lights in. You can partially close or open this opening to let more or less light inside, which will then increase or decrease your photo's exposure. This is the second way of increasing or decreasing the exposure. Larger the opening, brighter the image. Smaller the opening, darker the image. Simple, right? When you are setting the aperture, you're simply setting how open the lens is. To make things confusing, instead of giving this opening a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, the aperture opening is instead given a number called f number or the f-stop, and it's a fraction. So you can see numbers like these on the lens: f by 1.4, f by 2, f by 2.8, f by 4, etc. Since this is a fraction, the f by 1.4 has a larger lens opening than f by 2 setting, and f by 2 has a larger opening than f by 2.8, and so on. Some cameras ignore the fraction and just mention them as f2, 2.8, etc. Like the ISO, setting different aperture values has some side effects too. The opening tells how much of the image is in focus. On a large aperture like f1.4, the opening is very large and hence only a small part of the image is in focus. The remaining part of the image is out of focus or blurred. This is an artistic choice. So when you have a larger aperture, you are not just letting more lights in, but also have less of the image in focus. Conversely, when you set a smaller aperture, you are letting less light in, but more of the image will be in focus. Third, shutter speed. As we have seen, the camera has a sensor and a lens through which the lights falls on the sensor and the image is captured. There is a shutter, or basically a gate in between, which is open just for an instant when you press the shutter button. The light is captured and an image is produced. And you might have guessed it, the longer you keep the shutter open, more light falls on the sensor and the image is brighter. And conversely, quicker you close the shutter, less light falls on the sensor and the image is darker. Another simple concept. The way it is measured is again not linear, like 1 to 10. Instead, it's measured in seconds. For example, if your shutter speed is 1, it means your shutter is open for 1 second. If it's 10, it's open for 10 seconds. But more commonly, it will be much shorter, like half a second, 1/30th of a second, 1/100th of a second, or even shorter. And like always, there is a side effect. If you have a long shutter speed, say 2 seconds, then your camera is going to capture all the movements that happen in those 2 seconds. So if there is something moving in the frame, you can still see the motion in the photo. Even if there is nothing anything moving in your photo, your hands might shake, which will contribute to motion blur. Sometimes you will want that motion to be seen in your photo, like waterfall or light trail photo. But sometimes you will want no motion in your photo, like a sports action photo or portrait. It's up to you to artistically decide what it needs to be like and set the shutter speed accordingly. That's all there is to know about ISO, aperture and shutter speed. 3 settings and their respective side effects. In fact, these side effects are the reason there needs to be 3 settings. For example, you're taking a photo of a person at night time. You have already set the aperture to the largest to let maximum lights in and shutter speed to the minimum possible to avoid motion blur. You'll definitely need another setting to expose the picture properly. By fine-tuning these 3 values, you have properly exposed your photo. The second thing about a good picture is to get the focus right, and that we'll see in next video. Please like the video if you found this useful. It will help me make more such content. I'll see you in the next one. This is Anjana. Bye-bye.